So it's kind of half baked right now. I'm still thinking about it. But just a question I had was like last time, you know, you mentioned, let's say, like the theory of education, and we talked about it in a bit of detail. And then you mentioned, for example, as an example, right, let's say in Iran, for example, the education system is a bit different. And you mentioned Iran a few times in a few different contexts. Like, so a thought that came to mind was like when I compare systems that exist, let's say even if we take Iran as an example, I find there's still a lot of similarities with systems that exist everywhere in the world. And I feel um, like for example, we take, let's say, the banking sector. Like banking in Iran seems very similar to what banking is outside. Education and, let's say, the apparent form of, let's say, you're going to school. Like there's the whole idea of how the education system was made to, like, at least in the West, was built to develop employees, right? And like there's this idea, and so you have this whole system of like grades and schools, universities. Like there's a lot of eerie similarities. So I guess my question is, um, I guess when we say we want to develop, let's say, an Islamic civilization and work towards Islamic systems, how does that come about? I guess, do we still anticipate to see a lot of similarities, but the core is different in some way, or like, or is it that we're always going to suffer from this reality that we unfortunately have inherited a certain system, or we have certain doing things, and that's just going to always continue, and maybe gradually there might be some here and there are small tweaks happening.
Yes, certainly. I think this is an important question, and also an important thing that we should be exploring. The reality of the matter is that a lot of these Islamic systems, and again, we would need to define what makes a system Islamic. So, for example, I can label something as an Islamic school, right? I mean, give it a name. We do that, right? We have in our community, we have the Jafri school, and it's good to name after like the Imams. But just giving a name and a label doesn't make something truly Islamic. So, that's a question, firstly, that we need to answer. What truly makes a system Islamic? So that's one question, but we won't get into that. The reality of the matter is that whatever that true ideal Islamic educational system is, we are very far from that, even in a place like Iran. Why? Because uh, it's something that needs to be like developed, right? It's not something ready out there. So Islamic educational system must be something that must cater to educational needs of people in today's day and age, and that means that you have to develop. So Islamic educational system is the fourth layer, right? Social system that's built on the previous layer, which is the Islamic educational theory, which for whatever reasons and that we can discuss is not fully developed yet. In fact, it's been maybe like around 10 years that the House of Qom is doing a lot of research in these areas. But you know how things are in, right? Like you have to work a lot, new ideas, new theories come, they need to solidify, they need to be criticized. And then, even after a theory becomes solid and strong, to change a theory into a system itself is something that requires a lot of effort. So I would say that I would say two things. I mean, if you just specifically ask about Iran's educational system, I would say that from what we would imagine as that ideal Islamic educational system, we are very far. And maybe because we haven't imagined it with it all its details, maybe it will look completely different from the educational system we had right now, completely, even in its apparent aspect. Maybe we won't have, I'm just speculating, we won't have like the seating arrangement that we have right now. Even to that extent, Islamic ideas can change. Or one example that I would give that clearly would change is that the subjects taught at school will drastically change. Okay, so it's not that it always has to be the subjects that we study right now. It's going to be very different if Islam really wants to do so. That's one point. The second point I would say that, but yet it's not the case that these similarities mean that it's exactly the same. No, there are differences, as you tried to point to, that there are some differences in the culture, in those hidden aspects, the environment that's there. So I would say, for example, I mean, we can go in details, but I would say that Iranian schools are much, much better compared to what you have in the Western schools in terms of upbringing of the children, the values that they get, the environment that they get, ideas they're introduced to, but it's very far from that ideal. And I think that's one of the duties that we have collectively as Shias and Muslims, and especially it's the duty of the Hausa and ulama to develop these Islamic systems. And again, it's easy to say, doing it requires a lot of research work. And to be very honest, also, the Western civilization also hasn't reached these systems in a day or two. They worked hard, of course, with all the oppressions and that they did. So their rise to prominence was accompanied by trampling upon others. We know this colonialism is a clear example. But to develop their system, they worked hard, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said that whoever works hard, he'll get the result of his actions, right or wrong. So Muslims in general have to step up their game and develop their original Islamic systems. Some of them we have, some of them are incomplete, but inshallah, it's work in progress with the hope that the system will become stronger and stronger, inshallah.
So in the lectures, um, I hope I'm catching this right. There's been a lot of discussion on civilizations in the past, a template for the civilization currently, and ideals for the future. But what's missing for me, and maybe you'll speak about it today or in future lectures, is a linkage to the individual, right? And as an individual, the first thing on my mind isn't about how can I participate in building a future Islamic civilization. It's what am I doing today that's empowering the Taghut, right? And one thing I've noticed is that there's more than a few individuals um, in our communities, in the Western communities, in the Muslim communities, that are actually empowering the anti Islamic civilization. And maybe some of us don't even realize we're doing it. And maybe some of us don't even realize that we should be thoughtful about where we are spending 8 hours of the day, where we're working, and where we're doing our voluntary efforts. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's so definitely in today's session, it's a part of it is going to be what you just mentioned. That inshallah, when I come to that portion, I'll explain that when we have these kind of topics. So at one time, you're looking at as a social duty, a collective duty of all the Muslims, and we need to see what's happening there. But there's also a level where now you look at your individual duty in this surrounding and these settings. And you're right that at times, because modern world as a civilization is a very complex and also a powerful force, and therefore how we maneuver our way through this complex surroundings. And again, as I mentioned, it's like it's complex in the sense that it's set of ideas around you, it's set of values around you, it's a set of knowledge around you, something that's claimed to be knowledge, it's the social systems products, it's a lot of things, there's a lot going on there. So it requires us to be much more careful, alert of how we are dealing with this. So inshallah, I'll come to that part in my today's session. A part of it is going to be what's our strategy as individuals dealing with this kind of a thing, so that not only we're not helping the wrong civilization which will take us away from God, but inshallah we can also slowly and gradually do something whereby we can protect ourselves first, and then even make a positive contribution, build something slowly, that inshallah the next generations would come and carry it forward. We have a long way to go, inshallah, especially for the Muslims in the West. Inshallah, I'll speak more about it in today's session, inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Again, I thank you all for your presence, attendance. It's Saturday there. It's Saturday evening here. It's Saturday morning there. It's your holiday, and it's you've taken out time for a very noble, like pursuit, that is seeking knowledge, trying to understand our own times, so that we can figure out what's our duty to Allah Subhanahu wa Taala and how best we can get closer to Him. Inshallah, I'll also take this opportunity to congratulate you all. Inshallah, we are very close to the Milad of the Holy Prophet of Islam, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who was the one who laid foundations of Islamic civilization, and he was the one who wanted the society to reach that ideal perfection, which inshallah, when the Imam of time would come, he's the one who's going to take that Islamic civilization to its peak. Of course, that doesn't mean that we don't have a duty. We have the duty to establish this Islamic civilization to the best of our capacity, and inshallah, that would lead to dhuhur. He'll return and then he'll take it to another level. Again, that's another topic that I wouldn't get time to touch upon. That in history, how do we see it? Where did it start? Where do we stand right now? And what's the future? But that's a separate topic. Okay, sorry. I think I lost you for a moment. So, inshallah, I have two topics to cover today. One, I'm going to very briefly speak about Muslim responses to modernity. I spoke about it in my last session, but I'm going to speak today about Muslim responses to modernity in the West. Okay, Muslims living in the West, how they have responded. So, for example, Muslims living in the West, how they have responded to these challenges of modernity. And the last portion, which again is going to be, inshallah, is going to be very practical, and because that's where I wanted to end, because this entire course without any practical takeaways would be like just a lot of theory, and people would be thinking that what's relevance of this to my life today. So in that section, I'm going to even make some very concrete suggestions that I personally feel that this would be part of the solution. Inshallah, you can disagree. You can say, "Oh no, this is," or you can agree, and they say that this is not practical. I'll leave it open. So inshallah, we'll end with some solutions and a lot of questions maybe in your mind. So let's get started. So if you remember, last time I spoke about Muslim responses to modernity in the East. And this is so elaborate and detailed that it would take many, many sessions to just go into the scope and scale of these responses. And as I mentioned, that modernity is a global force now. Not now. Beginning of 20th century, it was already a global force impacting almost every single corner of the world, either politically, militarily. So everyone had to respond in some way. So it's not that we have a choice. Okay, it's like it's something that's coming to you. You have to react to it, and people did respond. And even let me say this here, that even no reaction and being passive is also a kind of reaction. So some people responded by being very passive to these challenges and kind of accepting modernity as their way of life. So basically everyone has to respond in one way or the other, and in the Muslim world you see very elaborate responses, and I gave a few examples. This is a very long, interesting story. Indian subcontinent, Arab world, Egypt, what was happening, these Gulf countries, what was happening. Iran is a very important example of how they responded to these challenges. The culmination of that, the pinnacle of that, is the Islamic Revolution, 1979. If historically, it's a very, very interesting area and topic to study, but it will take like one ashara, right? Muharram, like 10 nights. You can call someone and you can go through it with a lot of detail. Um, yeah, I saw a part of it, so I don't know if you saw that series. Sheikh Khalil Jafar, he did in one of his Muharram Asharas, I think he tried to do that kind of an analysis and historical look at these things. So that's the only thing that I've seen out there, but there's a lot of scope for going into detail. But that's not my topic. What I want to discuss today is that how did Muslims, or how have Muslims living in the West, again, which is yourself, I've never lived in the West, so today I'm going to talk about you more than myself. Last time I was talking about myself because I come from the East. How have Muslims responded to this challenge? So let me quickly define the West, because this is again a matter of contention, right? What do you mean by West? Okay. So by West, I basically mean Western Europe and Northern America, which is you people, right? So Canada, United States, and the western side of the Europe. So basically these countries. UK, France, Germany, Poland, Australia. I mean, like just look towards the west of Europe. Why is it referred to as the West? Because it forms the core of the Western civilization. As I mentioned last time, Western civilization or modern civilization has a core where it started, where it's strongest, and that's the West, Western Europe and Northern America. In other places, their influence decreases. I mean, it's not as influential, but it is influential. And sometimes you might have societies which are far away from the West, but they are very westernized. One example of that is South Korea. Korea is very far away from the West the geographic West, but in terms of acquiring Western ideas and ideals, they're very Western or Westernized. Okay, so all these variations are there. So let me also show you something interesting. So if you see the percentage of Muslim population in Europe, these are the countries that have the maximum uh, Muslim population. So the top is Kosovo. So Kosovo is 95% Muslim. Again, this is all Eastern Europe. This won't be called the West, right? It's not that core. Of course, they're influenced by the West. Albania is 58% Muslim. Bosnia and Herzegovina is 50%. Another country, North Macedonia is 33%, Cyprus 22%, Montenegro 19%, Russia has 11.7% Muslim population. And then the first one in the list from the Western Europe, the highest number of Muslim population is France, 8.8%. Then you have Austria, Bulgaria, Belgium, Switzerland, Germany. So Germany has 5% Muslim population. So as you come towards the Western Europe, the Muslim population decreases. The more you go towards the east, Eastern Europe, Muslim population increases. But there's one important difference, that Muslim populations in Eastern Europe are not immigrant populations mainly. They are the indigenous populations, and that has historical roots. Whilst the Muslims living in the West, majorly they are immigrants from Eastern countries, from other countries. So it's good to note these different variations. Let me move on. There's one thing that I'll skip. Okay. So, what I want to very briefly do in maybe like 10, 15 minutes, and this is not that my main topic that I want to go into a lot of detail, but I just wanted to present this. It has a lot of detail. I'm just going to go through it so you have the outline of just a brief understanding of how have Muslims living in the West responded to the West, to the modernity. Before I mention that, I very briefly want to describe the characteristics of Muslims living in the West. So just we get a broad idea of what these people, I mean, people living in the West are in. Okay. So the first thing to note, I mean, sorry, these boxes were supposed to have pictures. So you can imagine the right picture yourself. I wasn't able to put them. Okay. So the first thing about Muslims living in the West is that majority are immigrant population. So in England, in France, in America, in Canada, majority of Muslims are immigrants. They're not locals. They're not indigenous people. Okay, so that's one thing. I mean, all of you are immigrant populations, right? Who have recently one generation, two generation, maximum three generation. And this immigration from east to the west is also a relatively new phenomenon at this scale, right? At this scale that we see. And a lot is happening. I don't know if you're following the refugee crisis and immigration crisis, what's happening. I was just reading a report by United Nations that said that in these uh, in the year 2023 up until now, 9 months, I think 180,000 people have crossed the Mediterranean Sea towards Europe. That's how the number of, I mean, immigration, and it's connected to the global situation, economic situation, everything. So anyhow, so this is first thing about. A second thing about Muslims living in the West is that compared to other social groups, they're socially, politically, economically weaker than others comparatively. Okay. I mean, if you see the entire Canadian society, Muslims in Canada wouldn't be the strongest in terms of social organization or having some kind of political presence or even economically. It's, for example, the indigenous local white populations that would be the strongest. Okay. A third thing is that these people, I mean, the Muslims living in the West, they maintain some kind of linkages to the East. We all do, right? I mean, everyone living there, we have relatives, we have family members, we are connected culturally at times. The food, I mean, you all know, right? You get all the masalas in Canada, I'm sure, that all the Indian Pakistani masalas, or you get all Indian Pakistani restaurants are there. There's some very, like, I mean, I don't want to take the names, like very strange things that all of you know that are very people are very fond of those things in India and Pakistan, even those you get there, like pan and other stuff. I didn't want to take the name. So linkages to the east are there. So it's not that they're completely cut off, but we should also note that as generations pass and you have generations that have only lived and grown up in the West, these linkages are going to become weak. So maybe 2 generations later, people, the same Muslims in the West, these young men, they won't even know where they came from in the East. So these linkages are there, but they might be weakening. What else? Uh, okay, maybe I shouldn't have said this, but let me say this, that at times, I don't want to generalize, I don't want to judge people, but I'm just describing the general trend that at times you will see that these people, the Muslims living in the West, they might have a sense of superiority with respect to the people in the East, but with respect to the local population who are socially, politically, economy well off, they might have a sense of inferiority. Okay, so they might look up to the successful people in the West and say that, oh, these are like so successful, so advanced, everything. And with respect to their own people in the East, so for example, if someone has come from, let's say, Pakistan or some any other country, they might have a sense of like, okay, I'm slightly better than them. Why? Because I can speak English, I have better education, I have more money. Although in terms of money, it might be like your standard of living might be similar to someone living there, but in terms of its raw value, you convert that money into Pakistani currency, a person might feel that is very rich. But in terms of standard of living, that's not what counts. So this might also be there. What else? Okay. Uh, Muslims in the West usually are not in the mainstream issues of the country. They don't participate. Okay. So, like for example, in Canada, or for example, in UK, there are some mainstream issues. So, for example, let me give you an example from another place. So, it's not about Canada. For example, Brexit in the UK. It was a big national issue, right? I mean, vote for it, against it. How much, for example, Muslim presence was there in those issues? How much Shia presence was there? Did Shias, for example, or the Muslims have a voice? Were they for it or were they against it? Probably individuals you can find. I'm not saying, I mean, don't generalize. You can find individuals who are interested in these topics, Muslim journalists who would be speaking about it, writing. But Muslims as a community, and Muslim community in Britain is not small, right? I mean, crosses a million. I didn't check the numbers recently. So such a big community in terms of numbers didn't have a stance, clear stance on an issue of such grave national importance. So usually the immigrant Muslim populations living in the West, they're not very much present in the national issues of that country. They're kind of cut off. Uh, they're usually not connected to the other weak sections of their own society. I mean, that's very important. So let me give you an example from Canada. Okay. So Canada, I mean, you know, right? The immigrant populations have to face a lot of different things, right? At times, Islamophobia. They're socially not the strongest. I mean, they've just come from outside. Uh, there's another section in the Canadian society who's very similar to the Muslims, and that are the indigenous people in Canada. So I'm sure all of you know that 5% of Canadian population is indigenous people. And you know, historically, they've been oppressed. Their rights were taken away, their lands were taken away. And even right now, economically, socially, politically, they struggle because Canada is 80% it's white. I mean, ethnically, it's white. And indigenous, so your Canada has 80% white population, 5% indigenous, and roughly 5% immigrants. And these immigrants and the indigenous people, they share a lot of problems, but they're not connected. So Muslims are not connected. Or, for example, in United States, the black population there is going through a lot of problems, right? They're oppressed there. So, but Muslims are not connected to people who have similar problems, so that they can pull together their energies. Or another example, this is a question that should we as Muslims be allied with religious Christians on certain matters that we share? Because religious Christians also in the Western society are under a lot of pressure in different ways. Do we share something common? Should we unite in some platforms? But you don't see it. Again, I don't want to make it black and white. I'm saying at a manifest scale, at a scale that you can feel it, it's not there. Yes, individuals are doing. There are individuals, institutions that are doing, but you can't see a movement amongst Muslims whereby they say that, oh, we have to connect with the other downtrodden people or around myself. So that's another characteristics. Uh, Tabligh and outreach to non-Muslims is limited, and I'm sure you would agree, right, that the Muslims living in the West, the tabligh and outreach to non-Muslims, inviting them towards Islam, or at least explaining the Islam to them, you don't invite them even, is limited. growing in number. And this is something very interesting. I'll share a document later, inshallah, in the Google Classroom. It's a research done by a Pew Research Center. I'm sure some of you have heard the name. It's like world's best institution that conducts big and massive scale surveys around the world. Very authentic, very academic. PEW, Pew Research Center. They published a report about growth of Muslim population in the West. And the trajectory is crazy that Muslim population is increasing uh, much faster compared to other ethnic groups or other religious groups. And that has underlying reasons that report speaks about it. It's a very interesting report. It's a trend to watch out for. And that's even the reason that in some of these countries, uh, these far right groups, they raise alarm and concern that, oh, these Muslims are going to take over and these kind of things. So it's part of the national discourses in some of the countries. Anyhow, uh, facing Islamophobia and at times social pressure. So I think it's something all of you can feel. In some countries it's more, in some countries it's less. Maybe if you are in a very liberal surrounding, I don't know how the Toronto city is. If you are in a very liberal surroundings, you won't feel it. But if you go to more conservative areas, you might feel these pressures, a bit of Islamophobia. And this is very important, that Muslims living in the West are divided along ethnic and sectarian lines, right? And there's something very clear, right? Uh, you go to a big city, you'll have a Pakistani center, you'll have an Indian center, you'll have a Iraqi center, you'll have an Iranian center, you'll have a Khoja center. I mean, again, I'm not trying to judge this right now. I'm not trying to say is this good or bad. We can speak about that. I'm just describing the reality, because then it's a very complex question. How much of it is good, how much of it is bad? Was there any other choice? Could we have done better? That we can discuss. But we know this, that Muslims living in the West are very clearly divided along sectarian lines. Shias and Sunnis are very separate. They don't mingle with each other that much. And even amongst the Shias, people are divided across ethnic lines: Iranian, Iraqi, and so many other, Lebanese. All these, like you see, right, they organize themselves separate from others. Of course, again, I don't want to keep repeating this, that don't see this as a black and white. It's a shade, right? That yes, these Shias, for example, Shias in Canada might have some connection with each other, but that connection could be much more better. Okay. Why did I say all these things, long things? Because I wanted to come to this point, that okay, what I just did, I described in a very general sense the state of Muslims living in the West. Now, these Muslims who are living in the West with these characteristics, how have they responded to the West? Okay. So, these responses come in two forms. So, at one point, you look at these responses at a social, large scale response. So, you look at a very big scale, that generally Muslims in the West, how have they responded to these challenges? And for us, more important, we want to look at how, as individuals, we can respond. Okay, so, and I'm going to very briefly speak about both of these, and that would be the end of my session. So, even giving you preview of what I'm going to speak about. So, it's slightly different in the sense that the social response, I'm just going to describe what's happening right now. I'm just going to describe socially at a large scale have how Muslims living in the West have responded so far. Okay, and I'm going to stop there. Why? Because beyond that would need a lot of thought and deliberation, asking this question: how Muslims living in the West should have responded or should respond in the future. That's a very difficult question. I'm just going to describe how are they responding right now. Okay, so that one part of my discussion. The second part of my discussion is going to, okay, leave all of that aside. Me as an individual living in the Western societies in modernity, how should I respond? What should I be doing? So that's the practical part. Social response is something like this. I'm just going to run you through the outline of these things that I want to mention. I want to quickly reach to the practical side that we can do individually, but I personally feel it's good to have that bigger picture. We need to know that Muslims living in the West, how have they done? What have they done so far? So, the Muslim response to modernity from Muslims living in the West, it has these characteristics. So I'm just going to run you through these characteristics. The first is that usually the responses have been reflexive and reactive. So you see very few planned and guided responses, Mainly what you see is short-term defensive responses. Okay, very reflexive, right? So like Muslims in a good number, large numbers, started migrating to the West for a variety of reasons. They didn't have a plan that when we are going to go and live in a new society, what's our strategy? How are we going to adapt to it? How are we going to respond to the challenges that are there in society, in school, from media, at your workplace, in terms of your political position, your social position? There are hundreds of challenges that Muslims would face if they would migrate from the East to the West. Again, I'm not saying that if you live in the East, there are no challenges. No, I'm not trying to paint that picture. Muslims living the East have their own challenges, and at times those challenges are much more complicated in some areas. So I'm not saying that, okay, if you're in the East, you're completely okay. In the East also they have their own challenges, but in the West also you have unique challenges. So mostly Muslims have been very reflexive and reactive, which is not bad. It's better than not responding and just giving in to the modern world. So I'm not saying that this is bad, but it's lacking something. There was no planned responses. No one sat down. No leadership was there carefully thinking and steering Muslims living in the West that, look, this is the trajectory that we need to take. It's mostly reflexive and reactive. And reflexive and reactive responses are always like this. They're short term, right? I mean, you're put in a situation, you react to it, you don't know what you want to do after a few days, and that response finishes. Next day, you have another challenge, you react to it. Another day, you have another challenge, you react to it. You don't have a homogeneous way to respond to these challenges. So that's one characteristics. The second characteristic of responses of Muslims living in the West to modernity, sorry, I'm repeating this again and again so that I don't miss the what I'm trying to say, is that scale of these responses have been very limited. We have never witnessed a full scale Islamic movement in the West from the Muslims. Let me say this again. We have never seen a full fledged Islamic movement, a very broad scale of response to modernity from Muslims living in the West. The closest examples of that, which came close to becoming a movement, but it never became a movement, was what Malcolm X started in United States. And that's a very interesting story. If I had time, it takes around 30 minutes to go through what Malcolm X did. So the closest someone came to establishing a very large scale response to challenges of modernity as a Muslim was Malcolm X in the United States. And it's a very interesting story of what he did, how he faced the challenges in the West, and especially for the black people. I mean, it was a black movement that was destroyed before it became a movement. He was killed, right? I mean, you know the story. Like he was killed. If he would have lived, probably he would transform what he started into a strong social, political, economic movement. But we don't have examples of that. In the East, you have many examples. You have many, many full-fledged Islamic movements in the Eastern. In Egypt, you have Muslim Brotherhood. It's a very wide. In India, you have the Devband movement. In Pakistan, you have so many movements, political, social, religious. In the East, you see a lot of these. Of course, it's natural because the numbers are large. But in the West, you haven't. You see this less. Okay. Most of these responses are inward looking. So, when Muslims living in the West want to respond to the challenges of modernity, they're mainly concerned about their issues. They rarely come and criticize modernity in its entirety because that's very big, right? I mean, it's not easy to do that. See, it's natural that a community that's small in number, that's immigrant, that's socially weak, naturally when they're surrounded by challenges, you turn to yourself inside. You said, wait, let me protect myself first, then I'll think of others. That's what has happened with the Muslims in the West. Their responses are inward looking. I mean, just to make it clear what I mean, like for example, a challenge come in terms of children's school, and you're all facing it, right? With the changes that are happening. So automatically, what we do, and which is right, I'm not saying this is bad, but I'm saying this is how it is, that we turn inwards and say that we need to protect ourselves. So let's start thinking of homeschooling, setting up our own school. How can we protect our children? These responses are inward looking. We are not looking at that, oh, how can I deal with this challenge at the national level? Is there something I can do as a Muslim, as a Shia? Can I gather my energy? Can I mobilize the society so that we can fight for some of the rights? No, that's not the approach. We automatically become inward looking and we try and deal with these challenges in that manner. Fourth characteristics, and this is very important in my opinion, is that when you want to respond to something as complex as modernity, you need a lot of intellectual activity. A lot of thought has to be put into it. A lot of discussion needs to take place. A lot of intellectuals need to be there who need to be constantly thinking about this. Uh, Intellectual activity in the Western world from Muslims has been less. Again, I'm not saying there are no intellectuals who have dealt with these challenges. If I want to take some names, there are names. For example, if you want to see, for example, Said Hussein Nasr, he has written many books about, he lives in the West and he's a Muslim. He's written many responses of how Muslims should deal with the West. Okay, uh, I don't want to take some names because there are some issues attached with them. It was a very respected personality, but many things happened with him from one of the European countries. He had a lot of responses, intellectual responses. So dealing with modernity requires you to first present intellectual responses. And in the Western world, I'll give another example. How many of you have heard name of Dr. Kaleem Siddiqui and Zafar Bangash? Have you heard? Some of you have heard. I can see people nodding. Yeah. So, for example, Dr. Kaleem Siddiqui in the United Kingdom was someone who tried to give some intellectual responses to the challenges of modernity through his writings, through his the other activities. They used to run a magazine. It's still, I think it's still being run. I think Crescent International or something. I forgot the name. So, but this is important. If Muslims collectively living in the West, they want to formulate a response to modernity, they need to have a lot of intellectual activity. A lot of people need to think about it, write books, discussions, debates. Without that, it's not a task that one person can come say that, oh, I know all the solutions, let's do it this way. No, it requires efforts. uh, and you must be thinking, oh, all these are very negative characteristics. Okay, is that there are many opportunities present in the Western societies which Muslims miss. Okay, so there are occasions and opportunities that come their way where they can really contribute and take the cause of their deen and spirituality forward, but they are not waiting for those opportunities. And one thing I again pointed to it before was that most of these responses lack a broad vision. So, for example, let me ask you, like, just a simple question that uh, just for Canada, for example, uh, do we have a 100-year plan, 50-year plan of what do you want, how do you want to see Muslims in Canada to be? Do you want to imagine something like this? Probably, I'm not aware, at least. If there are people who are thinking along these lines, it's amazing. But see, long term responses. And again, uh, this is a theme I would urge all of you to explore. On the other hand, the Western civilization and modernity thinks very long term. They plan for future. I just gave example of these SDG, right? Sustainable Development Goals 2030. Okay, they worked. There's a team of 100 experts that just sat to prepare this document of educational goals for the entire world for 2030. And this is like 10 years ago. So they're planning for future. They're trying. They have a long term vision. They're thinking that, oh, we want to take the society in this direction. Okay, but when you see Muslims living in the West responding to modernity, it's very rarely you see that any long-term plan is there. That, okay, Canadian Muslims, what's their like vision? Where do they want to reach? Okay, so uh, I described this response, and uh, it might sound a bit pessimistic. That, oh, it's all like you're just saying negative things. Uh, I'll just make one comment there, and I want to move to the practical side. And that is that, firstly, we should be open to looking at the reality the way it is, even if it is at times a bit like, oh, we haven't done enough as Muslims. It's fine. I mean, Islam tells us to have self reflection, to have muhasaba, even if it's slightly harder for me. I mean, I need to look at my own self, individuals, right? If I'm committing mistakes, I need to go back, and I'll feel bad when I look at my own mistakes, but it's something that is a positive thing, that self-reflection always opens up way for better solutions. uh, One other thing I would say, that you might be thinking that, oh yeah, sorry, I think I lost you for a few seconds. So you might be thinking that, oh, these are very social points. I mean, uh, we have limited ability. How are we as individuals going to do this? Uh, I would say that, yeah, you are right. I just tried to draw a very broad picture that at a very large social scale, all of these need to happen. So I mentioned 5 points, right? That this is how the response looks like. We need to revert it. Instead of reflexive and reactive responses, we need to have proactive responses. Instead of responses which don't have enough intellectual backing, we need to increase our intellectual activity. But again, it's a collective effort and something that needs some kind of a guiding force who tries to lead the way and tell people that, look, this is the way that we need to go to it. But probably it's not the time, it's too early there, until we can have formulate Muslims, let's say, in these lands can formulate a full-fledged response. Maybe we are a bit far from that, but that shouldn't stop us from interacting with modernity at our individual level. So my time is very limited, but inshallah, I'll try and draw an outline. Again, after this, I'm just going to mention some practical points. These are my personal thoughts and reflections. Uh, you may doubt them, and you have the right to doubt them, because one of the things you can very clearly say is that, come on, you've never lived in the West. So, how can someone who's never lived in the West even come up with a solution, let's say, or a partial solution? Uh, so, I'll take that criticism. So, with this one thing, you can, I mean, listen to what all I say and keep it in the box. But the least I would want to achieve is that it should spark a discussion that at least these topics, do we have a stance? Does it impact my life? Okay, sorry, I'm back. Sorry, I lost you guys. Salam. I think he came to say salams to me. So the least I am trying to say, in my defense, I would say that although I've never lived in the West, but I can say that I've tried to read about it. I have lived with people who have lived in the West and tried to understand it. So, inshallah, these suggestions would be of some value. So, the key question is, what's my strategy? So, again, I've come out of those very social, very big, big things that are speaking, right? As speaking. Let's come down to narrow down to an individual, me, person, living in Canada, for example. What can I do? What's my strategy? I would suggest that we need to first have a comprehensive strategy. At times, we only go on defense. I mean, our only strategy to deal with the challenges of modernity is that, oh, I need to be defend myself, save, 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 which is necessary. When you have challenges around you, especially challenges for your deen, for your iman, you have to be defensive. You have to protect yourself from negative influences of the modern world. So there's no denying that, but I feel that's an incomplete strategy. We need to also have a affirmative strategy. So defense is all good. We need to protect ourselves, protect our children, protect our communities, protect my fellow brothers. Yeah, but I need to also have some proactive strategy, because they say, right, like the best defense is the offense, right? Like if you want to progress living in the West, you can't always be on defensive. Why? Because today you're put on defensive on one front, you're just fighting on that. Next day they're going to open another front. Next day they're going to open another front. We'll spend our entire lifetime just being in that state of defense. We need to balance between defense, protecting ourselves, and doing some proactive contribution, some positive contribution. I'll explain what I mean by that. Okay. So, what's my defense strategy? I'll mention a few practical points. And again, I'm just listing them because my time is less. All of these, you can have a lot of discussion on all of this. And I'm not presenting the reasons why I'm suggesting these. I'm just presenting that I think this is what should be done. Why can be a discussion. Okay. I'm not justifying why I'm saying these things. And there's a lot of discussion that can happen. The first thing I would say is we need to increase, if we want, and this is part of the defensive strategy. If I want to be able to defend and deal with the modern world in a right way, I need to increase my understanding of the modern world. I need to really understand what it means. And uh, so, what's the solution? Read, read, and read. Okay. What should we read? There's so many things that you can read about. Some of these, I have some resources, I can share them with you. So, for example, history of the modern world, very important. If you want to understand why the modern world looks the way it looks, you need to look at its history. I mean, it's natural, right? You want to understand who this person is, right? You want to understand someone. The easiest way is you look at his past, right? Where did he grow up? What did he do? What's his history is a very, very clear reflection of a person's reality. Societies are the same. If you want to understand the modern world, you have to look at it from the historic Canadian history. Why is the Canadian society the way it is? I mean, that's something that we can read about. The modern world today, understanding what's going on around the world in different societies, at a global scale. All these There's big changes happening, right? I don't know if you're following global politics with all these things that are happening, war in Ukraine, after COVID. There's a lot of change. China's power rising. We need to at least get a brief idea of what's happening in the world, and what's happening in the Canadian society. What are the issues? uh, we need to raise awareness about what modernity means, what our society means, and how it's going to affect us. So I feel that this definitely needs to be part of our defense strategy. We need to increase our basira, our understanding of these topics. And it really helps. It gives you a clarity of thought. You know what exactly you're dealing with, and you know the source of different things. Okay, that's one. And again, as I mentioned, I'm not right now, I don't have time to justify these things. This is something we have been told by the Ahlul Bayt side, because this hadith is that I'll mention. There's a hadith from Imam Sadiq where he says, Al alimu bi zamanihi la tahjumu alayhi lawabis. If someone knows his times well, he is not attacked by confusions. So if I don't know my society well, where I live well, I'll definitely be confused. I'll be attacked by different confusions. I wouldn't know how to deal with all these realities. So it's always good to be someone who knows his times. Al alimu bi zamani. So that's one thing. If I increase my understanding of the modern world slowly and gradually, I would appreciate this, that uh, Islamic civilization and the modern world, ultimately, if you go in those deeper layers, they separate from each other. And this is something that this is a realization that slowly and gradually a person needs to come to, that yes, you might see common things. So for example, I mean, uh, brother raised this question, right, that at times you see that in educational system, Islamic educational system and Western education system, you might see some things which are very common, and which is fine. But deeper you go in those layers of civilization, the differences start becoming more clear. So at the level of social systems, you might not be able to figure out the difference. Oh, Islamic school looks like any other school. You go deeper, you ask Islamic values and Western values. Now you'll see that no, now they're very different now. You go to Islamic worldview and the modern secular worldview, they're very different. They're saying completely opposite things now. I mean, the modern secular worldview, for example, is saying that human being is the center of the universe. He is everything, humanism. Islam is saying, no, 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 you've got it all wrong. Allah is the center of everything. And even if human being is, it's by the virtue of being Khalifatullah. So I'm just giving examples that, and the important thing, at least I feel personally, is to realize somehow that the ultimate destination where these two civilizations take you is very different. Islamic civilization wants to take you to spirituality, even material growth. It wants to take you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whilst the modern civilization may not take you to that destination. So increasing our understanding and basira, I think, is important. Uh, at a practical level, I feel that this is what we need to do. We benefit from the positives of the modern world, which we are all doing, right? There are positives out there. There's technology, there's so much that you can benefit from. But we need to be very careful protecting ourselves, our next generation, our children, from the negative influences of the modern world. I know you're going to say, oh, this is very general. How do we protect ourselves from negative influences of the modern world? I have three very practical suggestions for all of you. And this is where you might differ with me, at least on some of things. My first practical suggestion would be uh, preserve at least one Eastern language. So if I want to shield myself and my children and my next generation from negative influences of the modern world, one of the practical ways is that we need to protect our languages, the Eastern languages, I mean. So if I want, ask me for a very concrete suggestion, I would say that all of us, even me, because even I'm prone to this, because uh, for example, I speak English, my wife speaks English, and we're always prone to this, that our language at home becomes English. It's very easy for me to do that. So all of us, what we need to do is at home we preserve one Eastern language. Again, I don't have time to justify this, why I'm saying this. We can discuss this. But this is a concrete suggestion. And uh, uh, teach yourself and your children one Islamic language. So preserve an Eastern language. So if you speak Urdu, don't just leave them with one language, just English. And if that's their only language of communication, understanding, knowledge, a lot is going to change. But if you manage to preserve one language, one Eastern language at your home, within yourself, to some extent, half dead, half alive, it has a lot of benefit. and we all should take efforts to learn one Islamic language. And what I mean by Islamic language is either Arabic, if you can learn Arabic, especially the Quranic Arabic, that's like the best. Or if not, then you can learn Farsi. I mean, Islamic language, which gives you easy access to accurate and authentic Islamic information. In English, you have less. I mean, if you compare comparatively, the number of books published in Persian is like, if you want Islamic books, there's like few 100,000, more than 1 million books. All topics you have good, authentic. English, you would find it hard. So we need to open up to new languages. Again, you might say this is practical, not practical. That's another thing that we can speak about. A second practical thing that I would say that it's really, really important if you want to save ourselves from the negative influences of the modern world is strong families. And this is this I would say that this is definitely one of the key strategies for anything that Muslims in the West want to do, that they will have to focus on families, because family provides such a strong environment for healthy growth and upbringing that no other institution can provide. And that's why we have so much emphasis on family in our narrations. Yeah, so I was just saying that I feel, and inshallah I think it's something that many of us would share, that strong families is key to a lot of present success, because it gives the husband and the wife, the core of the family, the opportunity to protect themselves from these negative influence. And it's also a place where the future is secured, because there's no place where you can train the next generation better than having a strong family. And again, this opens up a whole new box, that how do we strengthen families? I would even say that all of you know, all of you are connected to these communities, right? I mean, be it the Khoja Jamaat, other centers. I would even go to the extent of saying that each of these uh, community organization need to have a family department. They have all these departments, like they have madrasa, they have economic upliftment, they have uh, I don't know, health and medical things, they have economic side, they have education, secular education, they have all these departments, right? We need a family department, focused work on strengthening families, equipping people with the right knowledge for making strong. Many times people, they want to make strong families, the poor guy doesn't know how to do it. I mean, no one told him that, look, this is how family works Islamically, this is what you do, this, they don't know. Families become weak. There's a lot of negative influence from the Western world itself, modernity itself, to weaken families. So it's not that modern world is saying that, oh, you have your families, we are okay with it. No, it does a lot of things that weakens families, and you all know what are the different things. So strengthening families from an Islamic perspective, it's a very, I feel it's a very strategic thing. And you can speak a lot about this, how are we going to ensure this? And there's a lot you can do, and I feel very little is being done. We don't have focus on strengthening families. And of course, the third thing, again, it's very broad, so I won't go into it. It's like strengthening communities, because uh, the only way to stay safe is being together. And the only organization that exists today in the Western world amongst the Muslim is that they're organized along community lines. So those need to be protected, strengthened, and made better. Again, this is very general. I won't go into specifics, like how do you strengthen a community, what changes do you need to make. It's something that can be discussed. Anyhow, let me move forward. I'm almost finishing. Last few slides, uh, so don't worry. You won't have to wait too much. So this is the defense, but uh, being always on defense is not very nice. You're always under pressure, you're always on the receiving side, you're always fighting. Even psychologically, it's not a very good thing. They say in war strategy, if a side is there that's always on the defense, it puts a lot of psychological pressure on them. So one of the examples of that in history is, for example, Battle of Khandak. There was a discussion, debate amongst Muslims, that should we stay in Medina and fight, or should we go out of Medina and, for example, dig that trench and make arrangement and fight? And there's a discussion like that. And some people amongst the companions, some of the young ones, they're suggesting that we should go out and fight. And one of the reasons that was coming up was like that you can't fight in your own city. That's psychologically very heavy. Like the enemy is entering your city and you're fighting your enemy inside your own, near your own houses. That's very heavy. You're I mean, you're too much in defense. A better way is that you leave the city and you fortify yourself outside, so that you are not in such a defensive position. So this is just an analogy. What can I do on the positive contribution side? Okay. So I feel that, again, I'm just reading the titles. One is that we need to somehow work on identity. I mean, someone needs to sit and define what it means to be, let's say, a Canadian Shia Muslim. I mean, what's a good Canadian Shia Muslim? How does it look like? What's that right identity so that any Canadian Muslim living in Canada should have? How should he perceive his position in the society with respect to other people, with respect to other Muslims? So this issue of identity is very important. We need to slowly start building a good Islamic balanced identities. Again, what it means, we can discuss. Or we won't discuss. I'm just mentioning. Second thing I feel is that we can do proactively. And when I say positive contribution proactively, what I mean is that even, let's say, these challenges were not there, we should be doing this. And that is, we should try and strengthen our Islamic worldview. And believe me, there's so much in Islam, in its worldview, in its teachings, in its akhlaq, that it's really amazing. So, Alhamdulillah, all of you are taking out time. And I feel this is one of those most noble pursuits a person can take up living in the West, that you take out time to understand Islam, the depths, and it's even very beautiful, these different teachings. There's so much out there. There's like, you can speak about God, you can speak about the creation and the universe, you can speak about insan, you can speak about society, you can speak about our path to God, you can speak about the leaders, the Ahlul Bayt, you can speak about ideal society, Imam Mahdi, you can speak about afterlife. Islam has so many interesting topics. So one of the things I would say as a proactive and a positive step that we can take is need to strengthen our Islamic worldview. And inshallah, if all these things happen, we have a good defensive strategy in place. We're protecting ourselves from haram, sins, those negative influences of the modern world. We also are proactively trying to live as good Muslims, inshallah, and we're able to strengthen our spirituality. Then, inshallah, we will become a source of attractions for others to come closer to Islam. I mean that's how it happens, right? When you have a living example, someone who lives by Islamic values, someone who lives by Islamic lifestyle, that person himself becomes an attraction. And when people who stay with him, sit with him, interact with him, he can become a very attractive force. And as I mentioned, in that civilization, you can become a product of the Islamic civilization. You can become a product whereby you are now an attraction. When people see you, when people see your conduct, your akhlaq, your other things, they take inspiration from your own community, from your own next generation, others, Muslims, Sunnis. You can become a role model. Okay. The last point, again, this is very general, is that uh, one of the positive and proactive contributions we can make is that slowly and gradually, if we start creating Islamic attractions around us, small Islamic social systems, because the reason is that the point I was trying to make is that if you're always on defensive, we're never going to progress. The way to progress is we defend ourselves, then we show the beauty of Islam to others. And the way to show beauty of Islam to others is not through lectures, is not through speech. It's through implementing Islam at a very small scale and then showing people that, look, it works. If you follow Islam, if you have your systems working based on Islam, it's beautiful, it works. Okay. I mean, there are many examples I wanted to give. My time is limited. Just a very small example. Let's say in your surrounding, you start a small fund based on Qardul Hasana. I mean, Islam emphasizes a lot on giving loans, right, without interest. So let's say you start a small setup based on true Islamic principles, guidelines, values, and this becomes a success, whereby a lot of people are helped, and you popularize this idea of giving Qardul Hasana, giving loans, giving money in the way of Allah for thawab, based on the values that are there in Qardul Hasana. You have made a positive contribution in your society. When people would see success of a model like this, they would be attracted to Islam. Again, it can come in very small ways, even at individual level you can do, or you can start promoting Islamic products. Okay. I mean, from something very simple as, I don't know, Islamic books, Islamic ideas, Quran, I mean, all these Islamic products, from the personalities of the Ahlul Bayt, Imam Hussein, for example, these are all things, these are Islamic attractions. If we focus on these two, making small Islamic systems, okay, a good Islamic school, truly Islamic school, a good economic system, a small bank, these kind of things, and inshallah we can do something thing. And the last thing is that, inshallah, we always try to keep an eye on the Muslim world. I mean, and what's happening in the East, because our destinies are tied, right? What happens to Muslims in the East is going to affect the Muslims in the West. Even the other way around, if something good happens to the Muslims in the West, it gives a lot of motivations to the Muslims in the East. So basically, the destinies of Muslims wherever they live, they're tied to each other. So we keep an eye, again, as I was just mentioning, practical points on the different developments happening in the Muslim world. Allah, this picture is very old, because I mean, I had made this slide very long time ago when, for example, the issue of Sheikh Zakzaki was prominent. We should be generally aware of what's happening in Muslim lands, especially Shia lands, what's happening in Iran, what's happening in Iraq, what's happening in Lebanon. For example, I don't know if you know, Lebanon has gone through a very severe economic crisis. The currency has been devalued 20 times. Means, I mean, their savings income, two-thirds of Lebanese population and 60% of Lebanon is Shia, right, is has gone under poverty line. Lebanon, 75% of Lebanese population is living under poverty line right now. Is going through an economic meltdown. Should be generally aware of what's happening in the Muslim world. And inshallah, we pray to Allah that with all these efforts, again, as I mentioned, our duty is to try. We keep trying in our environment. Inshallah, we take these efforts with the hope that innahum yarawnahu ba'ida wa narahu qariba. We hope always that, inshallah, the dhuhur of Imam of our time is close, and we are slowly and gradually trying and striving to prepare the society, ourselves, our children, for his return, inshallah. So, thank you very much. I crossed my, okay, I mean, yeah, I spoke, uh, I crossed my time by 7 minutes, so you'll forgive me for that. Inshallah, so that's the end of the different discussions that I wanted to have. I'll end also by apologizing. Some of these topics might have been dry, some of these might have been, uh, like, you might feel it's irrelevant. But when I was sitting and thinking, I thought that this whole package is something that I thought I should present. And as I mentioned before, I tried to go as broad as possible. There's a lot of detail in each of these topics, so I was trying to cover a lot of topics, but with a little bit of information and depth, inshallah. So I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that this effort, you people took a lot of zahmat, you took a lot of efforts coming to one place, organizers, so many things being done. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that it's something that's useful for all of us, and inshallah, it also becomes a source of thawab for all those who have taken efforts in this endeavor. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa alihi tahirin.
So,
Sheikh, I
Sheikh,
have a
we have one
small
question.
question that, like, for the first two sessions that you have mentioned regarding Islamic civilization, and initially you mentioned about Islamic civilization, and then after that you said that in the 15th century there is a decline happened for the Islamic civilization. What is the criteria when you say that this the till 15th century we have the Islamic civilization? How we are seeing that it was an Islamic civilization, like despite the fact that we have like this understanding that, for example, Imam Hussein salam in 60th Hijrah, for example, in Karbala, he said, "Well, Islam as salam." Like Islam is no more there. Like the foundational values of Islam is no more there. Now, why we are still calling it an Islamic civilization? What is the criteria for calling it Islamic civilization?
Yeah. So thank you very much for that question. So I'll break that question down into two questions. One is that, uh, what is the criteria when you can call something a civilization, even? Like, what should happen that something, a social phenomenon, can be called a civilization? That's one question. The second question is that, let's say you have a civilization with that first criteria. What is the criteria to call something Islamic? Because it's very important, right? I can't label something Islamic from my own pocket. I mean, I can't be doing my own things and on top I just write that, okay, no, no, it's all Islamic. When you open, you say, oh, it's all non-Islamic. So this label of Islamic is important. So that's the question, that what's the criteria? So for the first thing is that, if you have social systems of that civilization functional, then you call that a civilization. It has to reach that fourth level. Okay. That's one condition. The second condition for something to be called a civilization is that it should have a vast geographical spread. It shouldn't be something that's happening, let's say, in a city or a town. Something very profound might be happening in a city or a town, but that's not called a civilization. Something very great might be happening in a country, one geographical location, that's still not called a civilization. It has to spread, it has to occupy, like, I mean, in today's terms, a few countries, a few countries. And the social systems have to be functional. And if you apply these two criteria, you can say that modernity is a civilization. Why? Because they occupy a large geographical area, the least being Western Europe and Northern America. That's the And secondly, their social systems are functional and running. They're strong. Their economic system is running, their political systems are running, their media system. So that's the criteria you can call something a civilization. Below that, it's not a civilization yet. And therefore, if you remember, I mentioned that the Holy Prophet of Islam, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he left the world. You can't call that at that time Islam was a civilization. Why? Because there were social systems in place, but it was only in Arabia, parts of Arabia. It hadn't spread. And even Islamic social systems were not so advanced, they're not so complete. So that's one thing. The second and more important question is that when can you call something Islamic? And this question you can apply it to 15th century, because 15th century usually say that, look, these are all uh, kingdoms, right? Kings. There's Ottoman Empire, there's Safavid Empire, and there's Mughal Empire. These are the three big dominant empires amongst ruling over Muslims. And from an Islamic point of view, from a Shia point of view, none of these are divinely sanctioned rulers, right? None of these are. Neither are Ottomans divinely sanctioned, nor were Safavids fully divinely sanctioned, although it's debate. Some of the Safavid rulers were sanctioned by some of the fuqaha. That's a different story. But there are like Safavid rulers who didn't have any sanction from a faqih, from a jurist. And Mughals also were not divinely sanctioned. So technically speaking, they didn't have the right to rule Islamically. So how can we call it Islamic? So okay, the answer to this question is that firstly, it's a matter of debate in the things that what makes something Islamic. One of the answers given to that is that if you see that in different social systems in that society, in that area, if the core Islamic values are present to a decent extent, you can call it Islamic. So let me give you example. So for example, Mughals are ruling in India, right? They have a very elaborate judiciary system, right? Judicial system. Okay. This judicial system, to a good extent, followed Islamic procedures and was based on Islamic values of justice. The judges would be very careful. So you see that if in that social system you see some amount of Islamic values being practiced, you can call it Islamic to that extent. Again, putting a so what it means, and this is important, is that when we label some of these civilizations, some of these things in the past as Islamic, it doesn't mean we are saying it's ideal, it's complete. No, it's full of mistakes, it's full of problems, but there is a positive side to it, that some Islamic core values are being preserved there. Okay. So for example, even I'll give you some other examples. So Safavids in Iran, right? Okay. Some of the Safawi kings in Iran that were there, just to get an example, for example, Shah Ismail Safawi. He personally himself was also a pious man. He tried to be a practicing Muslim. He went to Muhakkik Karaki, who was one of the Shia jurists, Maraji of that time, to take sanction from him that, do you allow me to rule? Okay. So you have someone like this. But you have other Safavid rulers who were not pious. In their individual lives, they were corrupt. Okay. So they're corrupt rulers. But when they would rule and govern, they would take care of Islamic values. They would protect, for example, the right deen, the madhab of the Ahlul Bayt. They would patronize, they would help the scholars. They would help the Hausa. They would fund the Hausa. They would put money to propagate Imam Hussein's commemoration. So you see that. So if you see a political system that to a certain extent is trying to promote Islamic values, Islamic actions, then to that extent you can call it Islam. Having said this, I'll keep this as an open ended question because it's a question that is even still open to discussion, that uh, what truly is Islamic? So if you define the bar to be that ideal system and that's only you consider Islamic, all of these are non Islamic. But if you like dilute the definition a bit and say that If a system is preserving Islamic values, it's advancing causes of Islam, it's allowing people to grow spiritually, to that extent you can call that system Islamic. And the last point I would say is that, after all, it's a label. I mean, I'm saying that we shouldn't, when I'm saying Islamic civilization of the past, we shouldn't think it's something, oh, was something that Islamic doesn't mean sanctioned by the Quran, sanctioned by no, I'm not trying to say that. Islamic means that it's something that in some ways was conducive to growth of Islam and Muslims, their spirituality and their even material power. So we have to draw the line somewhere there, and that's the criteria. I don't know if I was clear or I over explained. There follow-up questions, I'm fine with that.
I just have a question regarding that second part about the how you if it's conducive to like Islamic like the way I understood was like if it allows for Islamic growth and development. Um, I guess in that sort of way, like there may be certain aspects in our community which is very promoting of Islamic growth. For example, things like this, things like how we have some Islamic schools, how we have our masajids. So if we're using it, how like I feel like having some sort of harder label as to say what is an Islamic thing or not is, I think, better because there may be certain organizations that say, "Oh, we're very Islamic," but then you see things inside there which are not very Islamic compared to what how we see it from, you know, Sharia or Quran or our scholars.
So I would say that this label Islamic needs to be considered with respect to the topic at hand, right? So if it's something where you have very clear Islamic instructions, then putting an Islamic or non-Islamic label should be based. So for example, if I ask you, uh, is it Islamic to drink alcohol or not, very specific question, you can give a binary answer very clearly, right? Because it's a very simple focused question about one single thing. Okay. If you go to slightly more complex thing, so if I ask you, like, is this individual Islamic or not, can you give a binary answer? No, right? So see, what I'm trying to say is that if you raise the complexity of the topic at hand, giving a very clear Islamic or non-Islamic answer becomes hard. What you'll have to do is that you'll say that, oh, this action of this individual was not Islamic, but his iman is Islamic. Maybe some of his values are not Islamic. You'll have to give an elaborate answer. So same thing holds true for community. So if you speak about a community and you ask, is this community Islamic or not? Now there's no binary answer. You can't say yes or no. It's not black and white. You'll have to make it specific. You'll say that, oh, this community, when it comes to remembering Imam Hussein, is Islamic. But let's say when it comes to their schools, it's not Islamic. So you'll have to break it down. Now, you take the same question to something as complex and as broad as civilization. So giving a binary answer saying that, oh, the 15th century Muslim state, was it an Islamic civilization or was it anti-Islamic? There's no binary answer. If you want binary answer, you'll have to specify to me. You'll have to say, the king who was ruling the Safavid empire in this period, was he Islamic or not? Yeah, I can tell you. I can say, no, he wasn't Islamic. He was a fasik, for example. But these these social and complex things, you have to give an overall judgment. So we do that, right? If you ask me about this person, is this person Islamic or not, I can say overall, generally he's an Islamic person, is a practicing Muslim. So we give a overall summarized aggregated judgment about things. So same thing you can do about civilization. So you can say that in 15th century, the aggregate sum total judgment that we have was that yes, it was an half-hearted weak Islamic civilization. You can give a overall summarized judgment. But the opposite of that, for example, I can clearly say, for example, that Saddam's government in Iraq was not Islamic, the overall aggregate judgment. Does that mean that in that government they didn't do even one single good Islamic deed? No, they might have done. Maybe, for example, Saddam's government was giving funds to the harams to spend for the Zuwar. It's possible. But the overall, the aggregate judgment that we have about Saddam's government in Iraq is very anti. The judgment would be, it's not Islamic, it's far away from Islam. So I don't know if I was able to make it clear that more specific you make the question, giving the label Islamic or non-Islamic becomes easier. More broader you make, you have to give some aggregate and summarized judgment.
Um, I have a question. Um,
Yeah.
with regards to one of your points of the defensive strategy, you mentioned having strong families. Um, so we have a lot of examples of cases where in the family the parents are both religious. Maybe they came from a Muslim country. They maintain their faith and their traditions and their language even in their household. They even put their kids in Islamic school. But we still see that the kids, for example, might uh, become less Islamic and maybe even be a source of like difficulty for their parents and eventually be at the fringe of leaving religion, for example. Do you have any suggestions on like how to build this strong Islamic family when the parents at least have this pull and they're willing to do what it takes? What should they do to avoid this situation?
Uh, the only answer I would give to that is that this question, for example, or other similar questions, we don't have ready answers for that. Because this is a very important question that Muslim parents, Shia parents living in the West, how should they upbring their children in a balanced way that they can shield their children from this negative influence? So this is a question that will need a customized package, customized answer suiting the needs of the West. Okay, I have general answers. I mean, there's so many general things I can say, but someone will have to sit, discuss, talk about it. That's why I said we need a department, like literally we need like a focus on this thing. There are no ready-made solutions that we can roll out tomorrow. Someone will have to sit and see and say that, oh, part of it is teaching and training, which we lack. People not trained from the beginning, to even like husband wife relationships, people are not trained that from Islamically. Or child upbringing, a part of it is training, a part of it is schooling, a part of it is friends, a part of it is some other community related factor. So someone will have to like kind of sit and draw out a package of what would be that like ideal family system for Muslims living in West. At times even it might be even as narrow as something that only suits Canada, for example. Or even, I don't want to make it very narrow, sometimes you might have a solution that might only work for Toronto, only works for Canada. You can't use it, for example, for London. Yes, if that's the case, we should have like that, because there are variations, right? Society in Canada has differences from society in England, in the United Kingdom. So we need custom Islamic solutions tailored to the needs of that time and place and the challenges. The solutions are out there. We have a teacher who said something very nice. He said that uh, Islam and in the Hausa, we have, it's like a gold mine. It has all the solutions that you need. The only problem is that no one is ready to come and process it and turn that mine, the thing, that raw thing into mind and usable product. Okay, so we have everything in our resources. It's there in our riwayat, it's there in our ahadith, all these guidelines. Someone needs to mine these information and these solutions from these sources, tailored to the needs. Yeah, but the example you mentioned, I would just say that either the parents lacked in something while doing bringing their children. Maybe they didn't know the right way to do it. That's what led the child to, let's say, go away from deen. Or maybe at times parents did everything right. It was something, an external factor, maybe a bad friend, maybe school. So you'll even have to identify what are those points from where this negative, where the problem comes. And you can summarize them as like 5 6 factors. It's either related to parents, or friends, or school, or maybe one or two other factors. So if you say that these are those 5 places where influence comes to our children, we can fix those, we can have some plan for those. But ready answers, I wouldn't know. You have access to scholars there, ulama are within you. You people also have lived there, you have a lot of Islamic knowledge. Is something that can be and should be worked upon.
Another question now in regards to the positive contribution strategy. Um, suppose you already have in the West, let's say there's a community of believers, there's a scholar there as well, maybe like probably many different sub communities with scholars. Alhamdulillah. Suppose we want to try implementing these strategies of like, for example, establishing the Islamic attractions or um, straight building our identity, all these things you mentioned. Um, where should this process start? Does it require the motivation in the community, and then they go to their scholar and they get something started? Or should it be the case that the scholar makes the plan and then he rallies his community around him? Or how, like, does it have to follow a specific way?
So probably we could say that uh, anyone and everyone who realizes this, that we have a duty, and realizes also that we can make a contribution, should take the lead. It shouldn't be the case that I'm waiting for someone else to take the lead, and until then I won't even do what I can do. So basically it would be like this: I get this realization that I need to contribute to my society, help them. I have a certain capacity beyond which I know I cannot help them. I should do to that extent. Okay. Let's say I know I've reached my capacity, and I still see there are problems, and I see someone else, let's say even a scholar, who's not doing to his full capacity. Then I can go and even request him. We can even tell him that, look, uh, you can do more, you can help more. So it's about doing my own duty, whatever I can do. I shouldn't wait for others to start, because then it's a never ending thing that, everybody's waiting for everyone to start. But yes, in reality it's true that some will have more prominent role than others, based on several factors. At times because of the ilm and the knowledge they have, at times because of the personal skills that they have, at times because of the monetary wealth that Allah has given them. So you can identify these many factors which increase responsibility, right? I mean, if someone has ilm, it comes with responsibility. If someone has a lot of money, he comes with responsibility. If Allah has given someone a lot of personal skills, he's a genius. Uh, I mean, they enjoy being that like that prominence in the society, but it comes with responsibility. So if everybody says that I'll do my part, I'll do my responsibility, then inshallah things can move. But the last thing I would say, that with having said all of this, any kind of effort like this, if you want it to have long term impact and solution, it needs some leadership, some guidance. It cannot be so like scattered efforts are also good. Like, let's say each one of you say that I'll take this portion and I'll do it, it's good. But the impact is not the same. If we collect our energies and there is a certain direction, some kind of leadership, some direction, then you can expect a long term impact, inshallah.
Sheikh Kazim, thank you so much for your time. Alhamdulillah, like it was a really blessed opportunity. Inshallah, we look forward to staying connected and benefiting from you in the future as well.
I would also like to thank all of you for coming, attending, and like, speaking is easy, listening is hard always. So your thawab is more, inshallah. And for me personally, it was really very uh, because I was expecting maybe there'll be like few people, and I was okay with that. There'll be few people, everybody on their Zoom. Not the best experience. So I was actually, it gave me a lot of motivation to see so many people with all the challenges that you have. People, everybody has their own challenges, personal, social, everything, children, families. With all those challenges, alhamdulillah, all of you are in that society with so many challenges. You are still strong on the path. You're trying to do your best. For someone like me, it was really motivating to see all of you. So inshallah, keep me in your du'as whenever you can and wherever you can, inshallah.
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد